Okay, so how did your work on disgust change the way that you looked at things fundamentally? I mean, you gave some indication of that already, but what else has it changed?
So since I was coming out of a psychological literature that was very focused on sort of secular ethics about justice and fairness, and then I began studying disgust and looking at the broader moral domain that almost all societies have. That then also led me to think about, well, okay, if disgust is a reaction to things that seem to be degrading, so an interesting element of disgust is this notion of degradation. There are always these vertical metaphors in which disgust brings us down, and disgust. So some religious practice in Judaism and Islam and Hinduism is about preparing your body to approach God and purification. Right. And so that led me to think, well, if there's an emotion which is about seeing our lower, baser animal biological nature, is there an opposite emotion? Is there an emotion that we feel when we see some manifestation of a higher, nobler nature? And I was just beginning to think this when I moved to UVA. I got my first job at the University of Virginia in 1995, and I read the set of Thomas Jefferson's letters. And in one letter, he describes the feelings you get from reading great fiction. He advises a cousin of his that he should buy fiction for his library, not just serious works of law and philosophy. And he describes the feeling of having your sentiments be elevated. Does it not dilate your breast or give you an open feeling in your chest when you see these acts of beauty and kindness and gratitude? I thought, wow, that's exactly it. And so because I'd been studying disgust, I then started studying its opposite, which I and some others called moral elevation. So there's this kind of vertical metaphor of elevation and degradation.
Mm-hmm.
And
that maps onto the body too, with regards to...
That's right, high-low, clean-dirty. It's a beautiful pairing. And so having this language of elevation and disgust just really has helped me see a lot of things. I can just see a lot of things happening. It allows me to even manipulate, like if I'm applying for a grant proposal, I can get very good at having an elevating ending, and to end with a note of uplift. And so it just broadened my thinking about morality, and this was around 1995. And so again, it just prepared me so that, and I'd already been to India by that point. I spent 3 months doing research in Orissa in eastern India. So it just broadened my thinking, and that's what allowed me finally to understand conservatives, because I had always been on the left. I hated Ronald Reagan. I thought Republicans were stupid and evil. And it was only when I'd gone to India and really tried to understand a traditional, religious, hierarchical, gender-stratified society, tried to understand it in their terms. I didn't try to just bring in my own Western left-leaning perspectives. This was all under the guidance of Richard Schwader, my postdoc supervisor at the University of Chicago, where I did a postdoc. It was only then that I was able to sort of get inside their minds and their moral system and see that there were alternative moral worlds. They each had their own logic. And that was the metaphor I came to. At the time, the Matrix movies were very popular. So the metaphor of the Matrix as a consensual hallucination made a lot of sense. That's where I came up with the idea of just speaking about moral matrices. We each have our different moral matrices. Mm-hmm.
That are grounded in biology. And
biology, in the sense that gives us the potential. It's like the building blocks of this matrix can't be just anything. It comes from our experiences, our embodied experiences. And again, George Lakoff is the master of that thinking. And so it was only then that I was able to now listen to conservative talk radio and Christian religious radio and see, rather than just saying, oh, those stupid, terrible people, say oh, wow, yeah, I can see that they're striving for certain virtues.
Right. So you started to understand their metaphorical language, essentially.
That's right. And that was kind of like my, great awakening or scales falling from my eyes. But, it took a lot more years. But eventually, I kind of just pulled out the implants from my eyes, and I stopped seeing everything through a partisan lens. And I'm not on any side now. I'm just trying to understand what the hell is going on.
Well, it's really useful. It's really useful to understand that there are actual reasons why people see the world differently, and that you can't just easily say that one is right and the other is wrong, because the liberals are correct when it comes to borders, that if you thicken them too much and diminish the information flow, you risk making the society so static that any radical environmental transformation will sink it. It's the case. But the conservatives are right in that you pay a big price with regards to newcomers and new information, with regards to risk, to exposure, to contaminating, well, to contamination period, but also to contaminating ideas. And so then I've always thought, you know, the environment itself moves back and forth like a snake in some sense, and what we're trying to do is stay on the center of its back. And the only way we can do that is by having people pull to the right and say, be careful, and people pull to the left and say, well, yeah, but be open. With that dialogue and the exchange of information that dialogue allows, we can maybe specify the center of that moving target and stay on the back, let's say.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a really complicated metaphor with the snake, but I think it's a perfect way in to what's going on campus and to why viewpoint diversity is so important. Because I agree exactly with what you just said. And so the view that I've come to in studying moral psychology is that humans are ultra-social apes. We evolved to live in these small groups that are fighting with each other. We evolved to have these low-level animistic religions. That's our steady state. That's the way we were for at least 100,000 years, or much more, probably closer to 1 million in some form. So that's sort of our design. That's what we were designed for, in a sense. And in that sense, as individuals, we're really kind of stupid, tribal creatures designed to do post hoc reasoning. But if you put us together in the right way, with the right checks, with the right systems, the whole can be vastly smarter than the components that go into it, which is true of the brain too. The brain is composed of neurons. Each neuron is really kind of a stupid little switch. But you put them together in the right way, and you get something really brilliant. And in the same way, I don't know all the history here, but my understanding is that science begins, the culture of science, the scientific revolution begins in Europe in the 17th century. As you get the printing press so people can share their ideas, but you get communities of people who are challenging each other's ideas. And that's what makes it so brilliant, is that people have to do their best. We're really bad at disconfirming our own ideas. It's very hard to do that. But you put your ideas out there, and then everyone else is motivated to challenge them. And so if you put us together in the right way, the truth comes out. And so adversarial systems of law, journalists know this, they have to listen to both sides, scientists know this, social scientists should know this. Okay, what happened? Well, the academy has always leaned left in the 20th century, but leaning isn't the problem. So people think, oh, viewpoint diversity, we need everybody, we need Nazis, we need every view. No, we don't need everybody. What we need is no orthodoxy. That's what's fatal, orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So if you have a field like sociology or social psychology, in which it's 2 or 3 to 1 left to right, that's totally fine with me. That's totally fine. Because if someone makes some claim that's just like ideologically blind, someone will say, common sense, other evidence that you've missed, and then the system works. But what I learned when I started down this road in 2011, I gave a talk at the big conference of social psychologists. I gave a talk about this problem that we're losing our diversity, that I could only find one conservative in the entire field. And I gave a talk on this. So what I've learned since then is that the ratio in psychology was between 2 to 1 and 4 to 1, left, right, all the way up to the early 90s. We've gathered together all the studies we could find. So all the way up to the early 90s, it's only 3 or 4 to 1, left to right, which would be okay. But then between 1995 or 4 and 2010, it goes to 14 to 1.
Do you have any idea why?
Yes.
And why that time?
Yes. So you get the same story whether you look at Republican-Democrat ratios or liberal-conservative. They tell the same story. So the big things going on there are, one is that the greatest generation, which had a lot of Republicans, so a lot of men go off to World War II, they're on the GI Bill, they enter the academy in the 1950s. A lot of them are conservative or Republican. So you have a lot of them. But in the 60s and 70s, one of the main reasons to go to grad school in the social sciences is either A, to stay in school to escape the Vietnam War draft, or B, to fight for social justice and against racism. So in sociology and psychology in particular, in political science maybe, I'm not sure, you get a huge influx of left-leaning people who are there to pursue social justice. So the motives are fine, and if it was balanced, it would be totally fine. But as you get these young junior people on the left coming in the 70s and 80s, and then you get the older people that are more politically balanced retiring in the 80s and 90s, by the time you get to the late 90s, it's all baby boomers.
And so do you get a positive feedback loop developing in there? Like you said, if it's like 3-to-1, it's okay. That's right. But maybe when it hits 4-to-1, it goes to like 20-to-1.
Then exactly. Then you start getting hostile climate. So I wrote a review paper on this with Joe Duarte and Phil Tetlock and Lee Jussim, Jared Crawford, and we reviewed everything that we could find, and we concluded that most of what's going on is self-selection. That is, people on the left are more open to experience. They're always going to gravitate against it. So you get self-selection. Yeah. But then there's really good evidence that there's also hostile climate. I mean, it's undeniable now that if you are not on the left in a grad program, there's just constant little subtle or not so subtle reminders that you don't belong. And look, in the academy, we're all about saying, hey, if there are subtle hints here and there, you can't succeed, right? I mean, that's what we do for a living, is we say that little things will stop people. Well, little things are put in the way of anyone who doesn't fit politically. And so you do get hostile climate. You do get overt discrimination. There's evidence of that. And then there is also, it is part of the story here, that what it means to be a conservative in the 90s and especially the 2000s has changed. So it is true that, that the conservatives were not in any way anti-science until much more recent times. Now, actually, both sides are anti-science about different sciences, but in America, the right wing, the Republican Party, it's controversial, but I do believe that the polarization starts with the right moving further out. So what it means to be conservative. To
be anti-evolutionary, which is actually what's happening on the left now too.
Exactly. That's
yeah.
Right.
So
that's right.
well,
postmodern left.
I talked to Brett Weinstein the other day, and he one of his claims is that evolutionary biology has something in it to offend everyone. So it's a science that's very likely to be targeted by extremists. You also brought up something that actually touches on the difficult problem of how it is that you might define someone who's ideologically possessed, let's say, or ideologically rigid. Because the idea was that you can make a valid case for the utility of free information flow and the free flow of people that would go along with that, and you can make a good case for the danger of that. And so the idea might be that if you're only making a case for the danger of that, then you're tilted too far to the right. And if you're only making a case for the utility of that, then you're tilted too far to the left.
Exactly, that's right. And so we can look at immigration as a nice example. There's a recent essay in The Atlantic, I think it was, by Peter Beinart, where he starts with a lot of quotes that are pretty nuanced positions about immigration from Barack Obama, Paul Krugman, a bunch of other people on the left, who used to be able to say, on the one hand, compassion, economic, on the other hand, we have to have a legal process, and there's a threat to low-wage workers. So people on the left used to be able to talk about immigration and talk about the pros and cons, the pluses and minuses. But Beinart shows how in the last 4 or 5 years, you can't. If you so much as suggest that, well, maybe immigration is on net good, but it might have some deleterious effects on certain classes of low-wage American workers, you could get in big trouble.
Right, because that's instantly prejudicial now.
Because immigration has become a sacred topic. So this is the key thing that I want everyone to keep in mind. We are fundamentally religious creatures. We're built for religion. And it's a great achievement to create a scientific establishment and an academic establishment that keeps that way of thinking out. Scientific thinking is not natural thinking. Religious thinking is natural thinking. Right. And what's happening to us in the last few years especially is a flooding in of religious thinking. And so let's get a bunch of social scientists to talk about immigration. What are they going to do? Look at the data? Weigh up the pluses and minuses? No. Many of them feel they're on a team, and that team is fighting the right. The right is anti-immigrant. It includes racist elements. Therefore, that justifies us in being pro-immigration. And social sciences there's always ambiguity. There's always conflicting studies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's multiple causal factors as well, always in a social science study.
That's right. So Beinart's point was that the left used to be able to think straight about immigration. Clearly it had it was generally pro-immigration, but it used to be able to think straight. But in the last few years, a religious orthodox mindset has overtaken it.
Okay, so we might as well also point out that it's a primordial religious mindset, right? Because, I mean, there are
I don't mean Christian or Jewish. I mean ancient, tribal, small scale, lots of gods.
Right. Well, so then one of the things that you might suggest is that when you throw out a sophisticated religious structure, an unsophisticated religious structure comes in to fill the gap.
I do think that's true.
Okay,
Yes,
okay, so
I do
that's
think that's true.
definitely worth thinking about. So
Yeah, that's right. So that's right. The thing right, with religions, we have to clarify fundamentalism is the problem, not religion. And so if you
and
get
it's close to tribalism.
That's right. If you get a fundamentalist, I'm happy to say, and if you have people applying to a grad program in psychology, and I find out that they're Christian, that's fine. There's no problem. But if they're fundamentalist Christian, I would think, well, let's say it's not psychology. Suppose it's geology. Mm-hmm. So someone applies to a geology program, and they're a fundamentalist, young Earth creationist. Are you going to admit them? No, I don't think you should. They're not able to do the right kind of thinking based on what we know to be the case. They're
not in the scientific paradigm.
They're not in the scientific, that's right. So if we wouldn't admit a fundamentalist Christian to a geology program, why would we admit someone who is just as fundamentalist about certain moral and political issues into a sociology program or into a psychology program? If they come in knowing what the right answer is, committed to that right answer, likely to get angry at anyone who contravenes that right answer, and showing signs of closed-mindedness, I don't think they belong in a grad program.
Yeah, I guess the question is, how in the world do you set up mechanisms to ensure that you're not swamped by fundamentalists of any sort? So those are people who are reducing everything to a single cause. It's something like that. How can you implement a structure that protects the organization against that without the structure itself becoming totalitarian? Because these things spin out of control so fast.
Yeah. But so, I think what we have to realize in the academy is that we face an existential crisis. We rely an enormous amount on public goodwill. We get enormous tax subsidies, direct research support. And recent polling shows that while Democrats have always had a higher opinion of the universities than Republicans, until 2 years ago, everybody thought universities are a good thing. Yeah. They make life better. So Americans have been very supportive of higher education. There have been rising gripes on the right, but it's only between 2015 and 2017 that now Republicans go from saying mostly universities are good things. In 2 years, they go way down and say universities are bad things. They're making things worse. Now, how is this news greeted? Pundits on the left are saying, oh, those Republicans are so anti-science. Look how ignorant they are. They now hate universities. Come on. Anybody who's been watching the news, anybody who's seen the mobs, the shout-downs, the illiberal behavior, the metaphor I use is like, Americans on the right and left are really supportive of the military. It's one of the few institutions that we still hold in high esteem on both sides. And so the Republicans more than Democrats. So suppose you had Gallup polling showing Republicans like the military more than Democrats, but both really like it. And then suddenly, in 2015, we started seeing video from all over military bases, the military academies, in which the military leaders are overtly right-wing. They're saying terrible things about leftists and progressives, and the midshipmen and the cadets and everybody is mobbing the occasional liberal, and they're behaving in a really despicable, scary, and intimidating way. What do you think the left would now think about the military? Obviously, support for the military would plummet. And that's what's happening in America with universities. We are losing the support of half the country. This is unsustainable, especially in red states where they control the purse strings. So I think we have a major crisis. I think we've got to go into crisis mode, and we've got to clean up our act. So just as we're doing in psychology with the replication project, we recognize that our methods weren't good enough, and we're doing a crash course, thanks to Brian Nosek and others, the Open Science Project. We're really trying to improve our game. Thank God, we need to. I think we have to do the exact same thing about partisanship and our duty.